The day my son decided I was no longer capable of managing my own life, he was wearing a blue tie. I remember that detail because I kept staring at it while he talked. The way it sat slightly crooked against his collar. And I thought your father would have straightened that for you. Your father would have done a lot of things differently. Mom, we've already looked into it, he said, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, in the house I'd lived in for 31 years. It's not a punishment. It's practical. Practical. That was the word he used. As though moving his 68-year-old mother out of her home and into a managed care facility 2 hours away was simply a matter of logistics. As though I were a piece of furniture that needed to be relocated to a more convenient storage space. My daughter-in-law sat beside him, nodding at everything he said. Her hands folded on top of the table like she was in a board meeting. She'd always treated our relationship like a transaction she'd been asked to manage. Civil, correct, cold. I used to try harder with her. I brought food when they were busy. I watched the grandchildren without being asked. I stayed out of their disagreements and bit my tongue when I had opinions. I thought patience was the same thing as love. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The facility in Clarksburg has a beautiful garden, she said. I think you'd really enjoy the community there. I looked at her. I looked at my son. I looked at the kitchen window behind them, at the oak tree in the backyard that my husband planted the year our son was born. It was October, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I'd like you both to leave now, I said. My son exhaled slowly through his nose. That exhale. I'd been hearing that exhale my entire life as his mother, and it never failed to make me feel like a problem he was tired of solving. Mom, I heard everything you said. I'd like to think about it. Please go home. They exchanged a look. That look. The one that said she's being difficult again. The one that traveled between them like a private language I wasn't meant to understand. My daughter-in-law picked up her purse. My son stood and buttoned his jacket. At the door, he turned around. We're only trying to do what's best for you, he said. I didn't answer. I waited until I heard the car back out of the driveway, and then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. My husband had been gone for 4 years. 4 years of learning how to sleep in the middle of a bed I'd always slept on the left side of. 4 years of cooking for one and talking to the dog and watching the news alone and figuring out which bills went where and how to call the plumber and what to do would go when the furnace made that sound. I had figured all of it out. Not perfectly, not without crying, not without calling my son sometimes at 9 in the morning just to hear a familiar voice. But I had figured it out. I was not a burden. I was a person who had lost someone and was still standing. The dog, a 10-year-old beagle named Harold, came and rested his chin on my knee. I scratched behind his ears and stared out at the oak tree until the light changed. My son called the next morning before I'd finished my coffee. He wanted to schedule a meeting with someone from the facility. I told him I wasn't ready to make any decisions. He said he understood, but his voice had that particular tightness in it that meant he didn't understand at all, that he had already made up his mind and was simply waiting for me to catch up to a conclusion he'd reached without me. Over the next few weeks, the calls became more frequent. Little comments slipped into our conversations, like stones dropped into still water. The roads get so bad up there in winter, Mom. Wouldn't it be easier if you didn't have to worry about the house maintenance? The Miller's mother moved into assisted living, and she loves it. She says it's like a cruise ship. I stopped mentioning that I had driven through 30 years of winters on those roads, that I managed the house maintenance fine, that I was not the Miller's mother. It was my neighbor, Patricia, who first said the word I'd been avoiding. Patricia was 73 and had lived next door since before my children were born. She walked over one afternoon with a tin of the lemon bars she made every fall and found me sitting on the porch looking at nothing in particular. She sat down next to me, set the tin between us, and said nothing for a while. That was one of the things I loved about Patricia. She understood that sometimes company doesn't require conversation. My daughter tried something similar with me, she said eventually. About 6 years ago, After my hip surgery, I looked at her. She had paperwork drawn up, said it was just a precaution, medical power of attorney, and then somehow financial too. She broke a lemon bar in half and handed me a piece. I almost signed it. I was still on painkillers and I was tired and I thought, she's my daughter. She loves me. This is fine. What stopped you? My attorney called to confirm the appointment. Patricia looked at me steadily. I hadn't made any appointment with my attorney. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I thought about it that night and the night after. I thought about how my son had mentioned, twice in the past month, that I should really think about getting my documents in order. How he'd offered, both times, to connect me with someone who handled these things. How my daughter-in-law had asked, so carefully, whether I had a clear record of all my accounts and investments. I had always assumed they were asking because they cared. I had always assumed the best about my own child. Maybe that was naive. Maybe that was just what mothers do. The following Tuesday, I drove myself to the bank. The woman at the front desk was young, maybe 30, with reading glasses pushed up on her head like a headband. I told her I wanted to review my accounts and make sure all the contact and beneficiary information was current. She was helpful and efficient and treated me like a competent adult, which I noted with a private, sad sort of gratitude. It shouldn't have felt remarkable. But it did. Everything looked as it should. I updated my phone number, confirmed my beneficiary designations, and while I was there, I asked a few quiet questions about what would need to happen for someone else to gain access to my accounts. She explained the process clearly. I thanked her and drove home. That evening, my son called to tell me he'd scheduled a tour of the Clarksburg facility for the coming Saturday. He said it in the same tone he used to tell me about school field trips when he was 9. Not a request, just an announcement of something that was already happening. I didn't agree to a tour, I said. It's not a commitment, Mom. Just a look. It's a beautiful place. I know what a tour is. I just think if you saw it, you might feel differently. I'm not going, I said, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't schedule things on my behalf without asking me first. There was that exhale. We're trying to help you, he said. I know, I said. I know you believe that. I hung up the phone and sat with my hands in my lap for a moment. Then I went to my desk, found the card I'd kept in the second drawer for years without ever needing it, and called the number for an elder law attorney my friend Ruth had recommended after her own husband passed. His name was Mr. Greenwald. I'd never had occasion to call him. I called him now. His assistant took my information and scheduled me for the following Thursday. After I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more durable than anger. A kind of clarity. I didn't sleep well that week. I lay in the dark and listened to Harold breathe at the foot of the bed, and I thought about my son as a little boy. How he used to fall asleep in the car and I'd carry him inside. How I'd sat with him through 2 broken bones and a case of pneumonia and the worst years of adolescence. How I'd driven 4 hours round trip every month when he was in college, just to drop off food because I knew he wasn't eating properly. I thought about all the ordinary, invisible labor of loving someone for 40 years, and I tried to understand how we had arrived at this particular kitchen table, this particular blue tie, this particular word, practical. I didn't find an answer. Some losses don't have explanations. They just have weight. The Thursday appointment with Mr. Greenwald lasted almost 2 hours. He was a small, precise man in his 60s with a careful way of listening. He never interrupted, never finished my sentences, just waited with complete attention until I was done. I told him everything. The conversations with my son, the facility tour, the questions about my financial accounts, the way the pressure had been building slowly, like something filling a room with no windows. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Have you signed anything? He asked. No. Has anyone presented you with paperwork of any kind? Not formally. He nodded. And then he explained some things to me. He explained what a durable power of attorney was, and what it allowed, what adult protective services did, and when they could become involved, what elder financial abuse looked like legally, and what remedies existed. He spoke plainly and without condescension, and every sentence felt like a door opening in a house I'd been locked inside. "You have every right to make your own decisions," he said. "You are not obligated to move anywhere you don't want to move. You are not obligated to give anyone access to your finances. And if anyone attempts to pressure you into signing documents under duress, that is something I can help you address." I drove home in the early afternoon with a folder of information on the passenger seat and something I hadn't felt in months sitting in my chest. It took me a few miles to identify it. It was dignity. The simple, ordinary sensation of being treated as someone who deserved to be informed about their own circumstances. I called Patricia that evening and talked for almost an hour. She listened to everything and then said, in her matter-of-fact way, "Good. Now you know where you stand." "I'm sad about it," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not angry yet. I'm just sad." "You can be both," she said. "There's room." That weekend, my son called 3 times. I let 2 of them go to voicemail. On the 3rd call, I answered. He asked about the Saturday tour again. I told him I wasn't going. He told me he was worried about me. I told him I appreciated that, but that worry didn't entitle him to make decisions for me. He told me I was being unreasonable. "I've spoken with an attorney," I said. Silence. "I have a clear picture of my legal rights and my financial situation," I continued. "I'd like us to have a different kind of conversation going forward, if that's possible. One where you ask me things instead of telling me. One where we talk like 2 adults who love each other." More silence. "An attorney," he finally said. His voice had changed. Something careful had come into it. "Mom, you didn't need to do that. We're family." "I know we are," I said. "That's why I hope we can find a better way." He said he had to go. He said he'd call me later in the week. He didn't sound like my son in that moment. He sounded like someone who had been surprised by an obstacle he hadn't expected. That told me more than anything else he'd said in months. I spent that Sunday doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I baked. I made the apple cake my husband used to request every October, with the brown sugar and the walnuts and the cream cheese frosting that takes 3 times longer than it should. I put on the music we used to play on Sunday mornings, old standards. Nothing dramatic. And I baked all afternoon with Harold asleep under the kitchen table. And I thought about what I wanted my life to look like. Not what my son wanted. Not what my daughter-in-law deemed practical. What I wanted. I wanted to stay in this house. I wanted to watch the oak tree change colors every fall and wake up in the mornings and make my own coffee and take Harold on his walks and have Patricia over for lemon bars and call my grandchildren when I felt like calling them. I wanted to manage my own money and my own time and my own decisions. I wanted, very simply, to be treated as what I was, a person in full possession of her mind and her life. I didn't think that was too much to ask. The following week, I called my son back and suggested we meet for lunch neutral ground, a restaurant, not his house, where his wife sat with folded hands, and not my house, where he could glance around and catalog my failings. He agreed, warily. He arrived before me. When I came in, I saw him scanning the room, and when his eyes found me, there was something in his face, relief, maybe, or guilt. I couldn't quite tell. I sat down. I ordered tea. I looked at my son across the table, and I tried to see past the blue tie and the careful exhales to the boy I had carried into the house from the car, and I said, "I want us to be honest with each other." We talked for a long time. It was not easy. There were parts of the conversation that felt like walking across ice, each step testing what would hold. He admitted he was scared that something would happen to me, scared that I was alone, scared that he wasn't doing enough. I told him that fear was understandable, but that fear didn't make decisions. People did. and I was still the person who made decisions about my life. He said he thought he was protecting me. I told him that protection I hadn't asked for felt a lot like control. "I need you to trust me," I said. "Not because I'm perfect, but because I've earned it." 31 years in that house, 4 years on my own, I'm still here. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the restaurant window, a woman walked by with 2 small children in tow, both of them in coats too big for them, both of them talking at once. We watched them pass. "I didn't realize how it felt from your side," he said. "I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a guarantee that we wouldn't end up back at the same kitchen table having the same conversation in different words. Trust, I had learned a long time ago, was not a door you walked through once. It was a door you chose to open again and again. But it was something. It was real. I drove home in the late afternoon light, through streets full of falling leaves, past the church where my husband and I were married 42 years ago, past the school where my son had learned to read, through the neighborhood I had chosen and lived in, and grown old in with intention and with love. Mr. Greenwald had drawn up a simple document, an advance directive, and a clearly designated medical power of attorney that named Patricia, of all people, because she was sensible and honest, and the first person I trusted to understand exactly what I would want. My finances stayed in my name, my accounts were my own, my house was my house. I pulled into my driveway. The oak tree was at peak color, all amber and rust and deep gold against the gray October sky. Harold met me at the door, tail going, unaware that anything had changed and certain, as always, that my arrival was the best thing that had happened all day. I stood on my porch for a moment before going inside. The evening air had that October sharpness to it, cold at the edges, the kind of air that makes everything feel very present and very specific. I thought about my husband, the way I thought about him most days, not with pain anymore, mostly, but with a kind of gratitude. 38 years. He had known me completely. He had never once looked at me across a table and called me a problem to be managed. I thought about Patricia and Ruth and Mr. Greenwald's careful voice. I thought about all the women I knew who had been through similar things, their children meaning well or not meaning well. The slow accumulation of other people's worry until it started to look like authority. There were so many of us. We didn't talk about it enough. I thought about what I'd tell my granddaughter someday, when she was old enough to understand. That your worth doesn't diminish with your age. That loving someone doesn't give you the right to make their decisions. That when someone tells you what's best for you without asking what you want, the most important thing you can do, the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to say clearly and without apology, "No, let me tell you what I want." I went inside. I fed Harold. I put on the kettle and sliced a piece of the apple cake from Sunday. I sat at my kitchen table in the house I had lived in for 31 years, and I looked out the window at the oak tree, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely at home in my own life. The cake was good. The brown sugar had caramelized perfectly along the edges, the way it always did when I was patient with it. My husband would have had 2 pieces. I sat there until it got dark, and I didn't feel lonely. I felt like myself. Some things, I have learned, belong only to you. Your name on a document, your key in a lock, your reflection in a window at the end of a day you chose. Hold on to those things. They are not small. They are everything.